Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough. You can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our two sponsors, Payhawk and Planful, who make this and all of our episodes possible. We have a great guest today, so let's get to it. Rock on. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. Fantastic guest today. Really nice and interesting fella. My first guest from Australia as well. Rowan Wilkie is the CFO of Nutromics, an Australian medtech company. Rowan, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
It's great to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me.
No, glad to. Was thrilled to reach out. And one of the hooks, your PR people told me that you were the funniest CFO they've ever met. So not to put any pressure on you or anything like that, but that was a big hook for me. So, well, Nutromics is one of those companies. I think someday from what I know about it, it has the chance to be a real difference maker. But right now, it's fair to say, certainly not a lot of Americans know about it, and most of my audience is American. But what can you tell us about Nutromics at the 10,000-foot view?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to give an overview. Nutromics is a company that's based in Melbourne, Australia, but we also have a laboratory and some operations in San Diego, one of my favorite places in the world. We're developing a medical wearable that can monitor any diagnostic target, including drugs, proteins, biomarkers, and hormones, continuously and in real time. And we call it a lab on a patch, and is what we think is an extension or a next generation version of what many people see around the place these days, which is a continuous glucose monitor. And unlike glucose, we can monitor many other molecules. So we're in first clinical studies at the moment. I'm embargoed around that. We have some very exciting developments, and we have a huge pipeline of products, given that we can monitor multiple molecules in real time. We'd raised about $4 million by the time I arrived a few years ago, and by now we've raised US $35 million to date. And one of the big aspects of our platform is that we're building what we think will be one of, if not the world's largest molecular data set to enable AI-assisted new product discovery, and ultimately really make a big impact on healthcare outcomes and save lives through a lack of continuous diagnostic monitoring.
Other than that, nothing really important going on over there, huh? So
huge mission. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what impressed me about it? You have what do you have, about 60 employees?
Yeah, we have about 60 employees now. Yeah.
So it just strikes me when I was on your website and just from our prior conversation, you've accomplished a lot in a pretty short period of time. Right? I mean, you really...
I'm hugely proud of the team. We have an incredible technical team, which is augmented by a biosensor advisory board that contains the best of the best in synthetic DNA, and that comes from the University of California, Professor Kevin Plaxco, as well as the University of Columbia, Johns Hopkins, University of New South Wales here in Australia. But just as importantly, our internal team of engineers and scientists in Melbourne and San Diego that just amaze me every day.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So we'll get back to that. I want to ask a little about you. So you grew up on a farm in Australia. And
yes, I did. Yeah.
Not a common thing for CFOs, at least that I know of, but although I've met more than I might have thought. But what was that like growing up on a farm?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town outside of Melbourne, Australia, called Ballarat. It's famous for an 1850s gold rush, like California. And that's for your listeners, in the very south of Australia, south of Sydney. And yeah, I spent a lot of time at our family farm, which has a lot of quintessential Australian animals, eucalyptus trees, kangaroos, koalas, platypus, and many more. And one of the reasons why I love San Diego is seeing a little bit of home in the trees there.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah, those animals, they're so exotic in my mind that you mentioned, like the kangaroo and the platypus. It's almost like they're they're not real animals. Obviously I know that they are, but they seem so exotic and out of the norm that it's like, wow, it's amazing when you come across one as an American. So, but cool. So, and then you studied, did you grow up in a big family?
Yeah, I did. So I have four siblings. I have two older sisters. I have a younger brother and a younger sister as well. So we have a large family.
You needed one more boy to get the Brady Bunch dynamic going. So,
Yeah, completely. The
so
full
cool.
grid.
But and then like most CFOs that I know, you went to college and studied German. And it might have been tough for the 18-year-old Rowan to envision that he would be a CFO for a med tech company one day. But what was the plan when you were studying German?
Yeah, so I studied a mixture of commerce and German. German was an interest of mine from school. I spent a little bit of time there growing up. I've actually just returned from a business trip to Germany and other places, including the US, and had the chance to stretch my German for the first time in 25 years. So it finally came in useful in some business discussions, which was really, really wonderful. Yeah, I went to the University of Melbourne and studied commerce and German there. Not necessarily a super traditional pathway for a CFO.
Okay. Well, I guess on your LinkedIn profile, I only saw what I wanted to see because I didn't pick up on the commerce part. I just saw the German part, which, as a guest on a CFO podcast was intriguing to me. But so let's chat a little about your career path, because I know you've had some great experience that led up to you being the CFO of Nutromics, but I know you worked at Goldman Sachs, for example, and a few other places along the way. But what are some of the highlights that, got you ready for the current role?
I think probably the most one of the most important decisions I made was I graduated college in the wake of 9/11. So it wasn't necessarily the most buoyant of economic times. It wasn't the best of times either. And I chose to join Ernst & Young, or EY, as a graduate, along with a very good friend of mine, Ben. And we were the first two graduates that EY ever took on that were never going to be accountants. We never studied to be accountants and didn't have the qualifications to be a CPA or a CA. What that gave me was a fantastic technical grounding, though, across their transaction services team. Back then, many years ago, we called it corporate finance, across valuations, mergers and acquisitions, advisory, due diligence. And what that really taught me, and I had some fantastic mentors who really pushed me around attention to detail and personal quality of work. I was told I was pretty good at being fast, but that pretty good wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Everything needed to be right. And so the thing that I took away from Ernst & Young before I went to Goldman Sachs and the institutional investment research team was really around a focus on attention to detail and getting the numbers right. As a foundation, that's really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I worked at Pete Marwick and Mitchell, now KPMG. But yeah, somebody made that observation. They actually thought colleges taught the wrong way. Everybody should have to get 100 on every test, but the grade is based upon how long it takes you to get that, and how much input you need to get along the way. Because you 88% might sound pretty good in academia, but in the real world, it's going to get you fired pretty quickly. So
yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah,
it's interesting. So you started off at EY. Are they chartered accountants in Australia, or are they
chartered accountants?
okay,
yes.
yeah. So yeah, we call them CPAs here, but okay,
Yeah.
so fair enough. And then where'd you come off next after your tenure at EY?
So after that, I joined what was then Goldman Sachs JB Weir, which was an Australian investment bank that was acquired by Goldman Sachs, and joined the institutional investment research team, covering actually consumer and retail stocks, and nothing to do with healthcare, consumer and retail stocks across the Australian market. So that covered all types of retail, from grocery to hard lines, soft lines, food and beverage suppliers, a whole mix of things, and allowed us to really dive deep into the entire sector, including the entire value chain, unlisted private suppliers, all the way back up into Asian sourcing, lots of analysis of North American and European private label grocery trends. I could bore you with hours for that. But what it did teach me was a deep sector expertise and deep sector knowledge was incredibly valuable.
Makes sense. And then what are some of the other experience you had along the way? I mean, those are 200% name recognition with these listeners, but
yeah, after that, really my career could be summarized as I took a view that I wanted to branch out from writing reports and advising other companies and people what they should do to figuring out how hard it was to get involved in the operations side of a corporate. And so I joined a company that, for your American listeners, is most analogous to Aramark out of Philly, facilities management company in Australia, the largest one in Australia, as head of investor relations and corporate development, and really entered finance in the corporation side of things from the investor background. So that's the Goldman Sachs part. But then quite quickly branched out into other aspects of operational finance, as well as operations leadership. And over the next 9 years, I ended up selling the company to private equity, IPOing the business back. I ended up as a CEO at 32, working out of London, running a business for a major private equity firm briefly, and then selling that business, coming back home and doing the IPO of that business. And so learned a huge amount in my first corporate role after the advisory stint. And then just zooming across into sort of 2015 to 2017 was the first CFO of Australia's largest digital healthcare company, which is owned by Telstra Health. The most analogous North American business is TELUS Health, which is a fantastic Canadian-based digital healthcare business. And that taught me a huge amount around entrepreneurs. We had about 8 entrepreneurs across a dozen businesses, 40 software, IoT and hardware products in that portfolio, which was a very major attempt at Australia's premier telecommunications company to create a new pillar of growth in healthcare, and specifically healthcare technology. And that is where I found the bug for really the nexus between technology, which was a fantastically exciting and is a fantastically exciting place to be, but also healthcare, which has uniquely, I think, among sectors, people is a sector that is filled with people that are filled with a mission and purpose, far beyond making money.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing is you can have that mission and, still make money. But yeah, I get that. The motivation is just a little bit different. It's definitely more humanitarian, to say the least. So, but I'm curious. So you've had a great run. Who are some of the critical mentors that you've had along the way that really shaped you to become the leader that you are today?
Yeah, I've got to do somewhat of a cliche and come back to my parents, and obviously both my parents, but specifically my father, in terms of his passion for investing, and I think from a leadership perspective, really how they treat other people, how they interact with other people, that's hard to avoid. From a commercial leadership perspective, there's a couple of leaders at EY that really I appreciate now more than I did, for boxing me around the ears and teaching me the value of that discipline and focusing on getting the numbers right, because I wouldn't be where I am today without that personal brand and trust. And from a mentoring perspective, there's a couple of people in that stint at the facilities management company that I'm really grateful for, who mentored me. I won't mention their names. They're in large private equity firms at the moment, but really mentored me and took the time to advise me on different career roles, and have been referees for me multiple times in jobs in the 10 years since I left that company, and have been just fantastic supporters of my career over a very long space of time.
No, that's great that you've had those types of relationships. And Rowan, I'll go on a limb and guess that you're probably a pretty sought after mentor yourself. So are you sort of, is it playing it forward or paying it forward? I always watch that expression up, but are you mentoring any young professionals at this point in your career?
Yes, I am, and I could absolutely do more. So there's a couple of things that spring to mind for me. I get a huge amount of pride out of seeing young analysts that I've mentored in the past become divisional CFOs, and 2 of those I've been proud to be referees for them to now become group chief financial officers of private equity backed companies. from that initial genesis of hiring them out of a couple of professional services firms, one out of KPMG, one out of Citigroup Investment Banking, and just watching their careers flourish. They've obviously done all the hard work, but I've had a huge amount of pleasure in watching their careers flourish and have perhaps given the odd piece of advice along the way. I would say I spend a lot of my time coaching and mentoring my current team. That's where I get a huge amount of enjoyment. And that stems far beyond or spans far beyond just the day-to-day. What are you doing this week? What are you doing next week? But really thinking about their career planning and thinking ahead around more challenging assignments that we can create for them. And outside of that, I'm also non-executive director on a venture capital business, venture capital backed business that a couple of my friends founded. So I'm sort of stewarding that from a non-executive chair for them and really enjoying watching the management team there execute and also have a fantastic group of non-executive directors that I also learn from as well.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I want to come back to Nutromics. And I'm curious, what about Nutromics attracted you to the role?
I actually first noticed Nutromics through our wonderful head of PR had placed an article in the Australian equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. And I immediately zeroed in on a new tech startup that was developing a wearable, but it was for a drug called vancomycin, which is the most used IV antibiotic in the world and the most used IV antibiotic in US hospitals. 1 in 6 patients in the ICU in the US get this. And I recalled very vividly that my father had been given this drug related to a heart operation and had, frankly, nearly died from a complication of infection, and that this drug was part of that mix. And so I was super interested in what the team were doing. And then, as most of us do these days, went on LinkedIn, found out that a former colleague from the digital healthcare company I was speaking about earlier was there and reached out to him and said, I have to meet the founders, and realized that they were searching for a junior finance person. And so I talked my way into them hiring a CFO. Basically, I had to meet the founders and talk them into taking on a CFO far earlier than many startups do. I was employee, I think, number 15. We're currently at 60.
Okay, wow, that's a great story. I mean, I'm sorry your father went through that, but the fact that you sort of sought out the company and then talked yourself into a role that they weren't really hiring for, I think that's incredible. So we could write an entire book on that journey, I think. So.
Yeah, it was. I do want to clarify, as a CFO, I was also really excited and could see the massive potential that the business could have commercially in addition to impact. And so what I saw was a genuinely generalizable platform. And so it's the most exciting technology I'd ever seen, let alone have the privilege to be involved with, and saw the closest thing that I could see to software economics in the hardware world. And I still say that today.
Wow, that's fantastic. So when we spoke last week, you mentioned a little bit about how important the culture at Nutromics is, and you only look for people who you think are going to buy into the culture. But can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, really, from my perspective, when I was looking for my next challenge, I was looking for purpose, people, and product in that order. So I was looking for a mission, and I have a couple of young children and wanted to do more than just the next mid-cap private equity turnaround business, which is great, but not necessarily life-fulfilling. From a people perspective, I was looking for people with a huge amount of ethics and that were easy to work with over the long run. I wanted something that could stick and that I could really see through for a long, long time. From a product point of view, as I said earlier, I was looking for a genuine platform or network business. And sometimes in life, things come together, and I think I've managed to find all three. The culture that Peter and his co-founder, Peter Vrains, the co-founder, and Hitesh Mehta, the other founder of Nutromics, that Hitesh and Peter have built a really fantastic culture based on really what they call radical transparency, very open. They still to this day hire every single person or meet every single person in the business prior to their hiring. And beyond that, have managed to build a coalition of people that are all coalesced around the singular vision and purpose of the business. And that could be advisors, that's our biosensor advisory board, as well as employees. And I would say it's one of their superpowers is really attracting great people and motivating those people around that vision, and doing so in a way that we also have fun along the way and enjoy each other's company. We do spend a lot of time together.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, you probably spend more time with your coworkers than your family. So you ought to at least have a little fun and enjoy each other's company, right? So,
Yeah.
And on that note, if you pay any attention at all, the key relationship in a lot of companies is that between the CFO and the CEO. So I'm curious what your relationship with Peter Vrains is like.
Yeah, look, we have a really close relationship. I would say we have an extremely close daily alignment. If we don't spend that time, we can quickly get out of sync in a scaling technology business. I've just returned from 3.5 weeks one-on-one with Peter across the US and Europe. We go overseas together 4 times a year, every quarter for a couple of weeks, particularly to the US, visiting our team and investors there. We do lots of coffee walks together with Hitesh, many hours spent in meetings. And I spend a lot of time in meetings utterly unrelated to core finance, but are crucial to their decision-making as directors of the company, as CEO. I have a very close engagement with Peter's co-founder, Hitesh, who's the COO, and both of whom, as I said, are on the board. So it's a multifaceted relationship. I'd say it requires tough conversations at times as well, but that cuts both ways. It isn't just one way upwards to Peter, that's certainly to me as well. And I'd just say, I think, as we've developed our relationship over the last few years, that alignment and context is everything. And so making sure that we're all aware of where each other are coming from allows us to make really high quality decisions. And I would say that's the other superpower of our co-founders and the success of Nutromics is getting the big calls right. We spend a lot of time agonizing over those decisions and making sure we get those big decisions right.
That makes a lot of sense. So cool. And I want to chat a little about your fundraising over at Nutromics. And you raised a relatively good size round. So I'm curious, what was your, fundraising strategy, and what's your plan for leveraging these investments for future growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I joined, the business had raised $4 million to date in equity capital in US dollars. We've now raised a total of 35. From a fundraising strategy, as an early stage startup that is pre-revenue and several years away from FDA clearance and real revenue scaling, the strategy has been always to be really transparent with investors in respect of how we see that roadmap, the length of time and the amount of capital required, but also twinned with that, the prospects for returns, and really getting investors focused around a platform investment and aligned with how we see the business. So we screen a lot of investors out if they're interested in a small medical technology business that is incredibly light, that is more akin to what they tend to see day to day around a new stent or a new orthopedic device, because that's not us. And so for us, it's really around alignment of capital, because we know a year, 2 years after we raise money from an investor that thinks that way, we're going to have problems. And so a lot of what we do in screening investors is making sure that there's a two-way alignment, and that conversation is worthwhile pursuing. We largely to date have raised money from Australian venture capital and high net worth investors. We also have a large medical device company on our cap table. I won't disclose their name at this point, just due to confidentiality, but they're a great company. But we're also talking to a range of US venture companies and US strategics around our next round, which will be a larger Series B round next year after we conduct our next phase of clinical studies, which we're really excited about. And Peter and I have spent the last 2 years developing those relationships with you, particularly US venture capital firms. I like to say we're better known in Silicon Valley than we are in Sydney. We spend that much more time in America talking to American investors rather than Australian capital.
Yeah, you mentioned you and Peter did a tour of the States not so long ago, and you were in the Boston area and didn't think to look me up. Should I be hurt by that at all? So
I actually am a recent newcomer to the Boston visit. It's my second visit in the last 12 months, and I'm enamored with the place, as is Peter. Not just for the medical technology investor side, the history, the sports. Yeah, it's a fantastic place. Yeah, I really enjoy coming back to Boston.
well, yeah, I know you're kidding about naming your son after me, but is your son named Jack?
He really is, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's funny now. You were a little bit before the Celtics championship victory, but Boston sports fans, they can be insufferable even when the teams aren't very good. And we're recording this in early July, shortly after the Celtics victory a few weeks ago. But
Yeah.
boy, are we walking around full of ourselves right now. So like we personally won the title. So
exactly. Congratulations. And we in Melbourne, Australia, we follow a lot of Australian football, and it is absolutely like that. We're in the middle of winter here and in the middle of our football season, and people ride the highs and lows of their team, and we feel that. So it's an affinity with Bostonians.
yeah, and I understand that there are some countries like that with soccer too. Soccer's just never caught on really in the United States the way it has in other countries. So because it competes with our version of football. But anyway, we could talk about that all day, but a little off topic. I want to chat, getting back to Nutromics. So you've got this money. What are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you face? It sounds like you're kind of one of those companies that your fundraising is always going to be job one, not always going to be job one, but it's a big deal right now. You're going to be, raising money. It's a core responsibility. But aside from that, how do you sort of balance the investing in R&D, but also being financially sustainable at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's always a really difficult balancing act for a startup. What we've tended to focus on, and certainly one of the things that I've enjoyed doing, is sitting down with the team to really flesh out what are the potential investment opportunities. So what is the universe of potential investment opportunities that we have? And so I'll ask the team, give me everything. If I could raise $500 million tomorrow, where would you invest and why? And that process is always a fun process to put what I call put all our poker chips on the table and then sort and sift them. To use the words of another mentor of mine, a former McKinsey partner, Rod Laird. I then go through a process of prioritization with the team around what is the art of the possible. And from that, from a capital allocation perspective, which is my big passion, I then have more confidence that we have the best possible investment opportunities to bid for the capital. And in the finance world, we often call that sources and uses of funds, which is a bit mechanistic. In raising the capital, the most important thing is that we have really clear milestones before we raise the next round. And so we have a really clear value inflection. That is to say, we're not partway through a clinical study, we're not partway through and have sort of delivered something. We have very clear, demonstrable, data-driven value inflection that investors and ourselves can point to say, yeah, things have definitely progressed and changed here. There's a new leg to this, and that allows us to have a platform to raise that next round. From a clinical and R&D perspective, that's where the majority of our funds go, and the team have been really fantastic in working together to deliver a strategy that is, we're very internalized in terms of our technology stack. So we have an internal electronics team, internal engineering, internal firmware software, as well as our chemistry. So all of the subsystems of our technology are all in-house, which is a really important part of our strategy. It's more capital intensive, but it is for us, when we think about the long-term vision, and we have a very, very long-term plan, that's about maximizing shareholder value on that long run, and attracting investors who share that vision.
No, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's great, Rowan. And since you did name your son after me, when you do go public someday, if that happens, I do want to be put on the old friends and family list. So,
Yeah, on the what we call the chairman's list. Yeah,
the chairman, yeah, we call it the F&F list locally, but cool.
yeah.
Well, I want to get back to a little bit about financial leadership generally. And you've had a fantastic career. I want to get your insights on how the role of the CFO and financial leadership is changing generally, and where you see financial leadership going over the next several years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I look back over how the CFO has changed over my career, and I was fortunate in my early and mid-20s of having really close proximity to leading public company CFOs at Goldman and EY. In terms of history, financial leadership has for some time required much more than scorekeeping and just adding up the results. The modern CFO obviously is moving beyond picking up investor relations and risk management and being a strategic advisor to the chief executive. I would say, in addition to that, the future CFO, the challenge will continue to be turning what are now vast arrays of data, and we can talk about AI and machine learning, and really just the sheer volumes of data that are coming through both financial and operational, and turning that into actionable insight, and not just insight, but insights that are actionable, and then helping the team to execute, and in part for the CFO playing a control role of keeping the team focused on capital allocation choices and then execution management. My big passion, and I think as I've said several times, is capital allocation, because where we spend our money and time is our strategy. And so making sure that we're doing a few things really, really well is a huge, huge part of how I see my value add in the business.
Interesting. I'm legally required to ask you this question, Rowan, but how do you see Gen AI and other cutting edge technologies impacting the world going forward?
I think at the moment, Gen AI is in its utter infancy, and I hear a lot of people quip that it is the worst it will ever be. And for me, I think it's difficult from a human brain perspective to understand exponential growth. From a finance point of view, we call it compounding, or talk about compounding. I think on a 2-year plus view, it's really going to have some very interesting impacts and applications. From a finance perspective, I don't see Gen AI or text-based Gen AI as having a huge impact in the near run, but as data sets grow and the quality of models improves, I do think that there will be some very, very interesting signals, patterns, and, as I said, actionable insights that will come from within businesses. And historically, CFOs have owned the enterprise resource planning platforms, the ERPs. And for me, the marriage of ERP structured data with unstructured data to drive actionable insights and patterns will become commonplace and part of our daily life. And the CFO will have to take on board, teams and people to manage that and also capture value from that. Whether that value in an industry accrues to the firm level or is competed away depends on your company and your industry. Ultimately, for us at Nutromics, we think we'll be creating at a product end some very, very valuable proprietary data sets. But from a finance management perspective, I think Gen AI is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's almost an unfair question, right? Because we're going to look back on all these answers 5 years from now and realize how far off we were. Either we overestimated or underestimated it, whatever it might be. You can't not discuss it, right? It is the here and now. It's the biggest thing since the internet, and it may even prove to be bigger than that. So
I agree with that. Yeah. We're probably underestimating its impact.
Yeah, that would be my guess. So cool. But so I like to ask our guests, because it's underrated for CFOs, but so important, and about work-life balance. And I'm thinking it's really hard for you because, you're CFO of a high-flying startup. Sounds like you're traveling a lot. and you're on this, you're on a board of a different company, and you have, is Jack your only child?
No, I have a daughter, Isabel, who's my firstborn, a couple of years older than Jack. And
Okay.
yeah, I would say from a work-life balance perspective, I think at least in terms of working with my own team, I try and lead by example. I've never been a fan of office FaceTime for the sake of it. And I would much prefer to demonstrate that quality over quantity in terms of office time and connection with colleagues, rather than slavishly being in the office all day, all the time. And the same goes for scheduling meetings and the timeframes of those. For me, in terms of the quality of time spent with family, trying to have a meal together that doesn't involve television or hunched over a coffee table, that we're sitting up at the table. And luckily, I do almost all of the cooking at home because that's my passion. And so I will admit, there are some nights where I say, yeah, let's throw the television on. We're all exhausted. A quality conversation isn't going to happen. But we do try and do that. And I would say in terms of time spent with my wife, the most important thing that we do is go for a long walk. We go for a long walk, and that's where one-on-one we'll download on each other. We'll talk about not just household things, but then also anything that's on our mind on that one-on-one time. The phones are at home, so we're not checking our phones at all. And so for that hour and a half, it's great exercise that's much needed, but B, it's uninterrupted one-on-one time.
Yep. That's so critical. It's great that you and your wife are able to make time to do that, because a lot of people just don't. So, but cool. I always love to conclude this with advice for the next generation of CFOs. And I'm curious, what you would tell somebody who's either in their first ever role as a CFO or maybe 6 months away from being in their first ever role. What should they be thinking about for a fulfilling career path?
I think in order to conduct or be the most valuable CFO they can be, seek out opportunities to be involved with the COO's team, the CEO's team, go out to operations, run a store, run a part of the operation, and that allows you to empathize with the problems that your business partners are facing. I've been a COO, I've been a CEO, I've run operations before, and that means I have some battle scars, and I understand some of the problems that my peers and business partners are facing. And so empathy would probably be high on that list in a CFO aspiring to have impact and delivering high quality advice that has impact.
I think that's great advice, and empathy is so underrated for executives. 10 years ago, if you said main quality for CFO is the empathy, people might have snickered at you. But right now, since COVID, it's really been one of the most important leadership traits that a CFO can have. So, but Rowan, this has been great. I appreciate you doing this for multiple reasons, partly because you're busy, but not the least of which is that it's 7 o'clock in the morning when we started this. So, but before we sign off, I'd just love to give you the final word.
Oh, no, Jack, I really think you said it really well. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat, and it's no problem getting up at 7 a.m. in a US-facing business. We're used to it.
Thanks again to Payhawk and Planful for their support of the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. Rock on!
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.